All right, well, today is hopefully the day where we take this thing for its first proper drive. We've got it running proper, cooling system working, fans coming on, all of that. We can start it up, we can walk away, we can let it sit there and idle. We got it moving under its own power. We got our hydraulics done as far as our clutch is concerned. We got our brakes mostly done. They still need a little tinkering, but we put it in gear, we drove it in and out of the shop. It moves under its own power, but that's about as far as we've gone, is from here to just outside the door. So it's time to take it a little further than that and see how everything holds up, see how everything feels, see if it goes through the gears, see how the engine feels doing more than just free revving, see where we're at. We want to work out any bugs as soon as possible. So the one thing we need to finish up before we drive it is our power steering system. So in this car, we have an electric Mini Cooper power steering pump. So what we're doing is finishing up the lines, heat sleeving them, all that stuff. And then we're gonna try to fill it with fluid, prime it, and see if it works. This is really the biggest question mark we have left on the build, aside from the obvious stuff of dynoing it and all of that. But if this doesn't work well, if this has issues, if it has dead spots, it doesn't feel right, it will make or break the way the car drives. It is incredibly important that this steering system feels good. I have been running for years the LS Miata with no power steering at all, because I had tried an electric column, I had tried an electric pump, I had tried regular pumps and had issues burning them up. Fortunately, this car we can get away with no power steering, and I love it, it's fine. But this car is too heavy, too much angle, too big of a tire to run without power steering. So I'm just crossing my fingers and hoping that this works. And we should know just from driving it around the street whether it's going to be promising or whether we have stuff we need to fix. So I want to get this ironed out as quick as possible. So I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering. We're gonna finish this up, prime it, see if it works. Well, we're gonna put some fluid in it and hope it doesn't leak. Okay, that's above the fill. So we got the power probe set up to power it. And the reason for that is the parameters I have set of the ECU output to turn the power steering on is set to only come on when the engine is running. So I don't want to try to deal with bleeding in, doing all that while the engine's also idling. It's too chaotic. So we're gonna just manually power it, get it bled, and then we'll try to start it and see if it works as it's all set up to. Oh, here it goes. Yeah, I mean, you heard it. All right, well, of course, I had turned the camera off, but we figured it out. Noticed on the power probe that we were dropping down to like 9.5 volts while I was trying to steer the thing. So I decided, let's plug it in, start it up, see what happens. So we started it up, the pump came on like it should, when it should, which that was good. And then as I started steering it, it was working like it should. It was a little notchy, but it was seemingly getting better. We'll assume when we're at a little higher RPM and have a little more charge current, it'll work even better as well. But it seems to be working. The real test now is gonna be to drive it. So that's what we're gonna do. Uh-oh. This is difficult. Not having a rear view or sucks. No, I might be okay. Ew.
It looked good though, like you kept doing like the Australian burnout car. Like the wheels just kept doing burnout. Like when every time you try to move, it's like fucking.
It just, once I got going on the street, I realized the deal. I'm like, oh, the first gear is so long. Like by the time it fully grabbed, I was like, I'm going like 30.
Like what you said, like now that you're like mentioning it, I'm taking it back. Like when you took off and it's like,
yeah, which is what I wanted. I wanted a long first gear because the long first gear is going to make it better for battling, getting off the line. Yeah, it stopped working when I was like turning around, but that might have just been because it was like idling low and stuff. It was hard to tell. I was just like driving down a straight street and trying to turn around. One thing I will say is definitely I underestimated how much it sucks to not have a rear window. which is like most drift cars, comp cars don't have a rear window.
I kept seeing you go towards the tree, and I'm like, oh, he sees the tree.
No, I couldn't, dude. You can't see. I'm relying solely on the mirrors, which, you know, works to an extent, but it's like they're not adjusted correctly. So it's like this, I see mostly door and some tire. The other one I can see things, but something's weird with that mirror. It's like tinted or something. So the brakes are basically not working. So definitely got to resolve that. Yeah, probably the most chaotic first drive I have ever done in my life. Just so much going on. Giant tires with a lock diff, you know, and new electric power steering and a pedal box, which I've never had before, with a really small clutch and a really long first gear. That might have been a mistake. I just used the clutch that came with the car, and I mean, I'm gonna give it a shot because it came with the car, it's already in there. But we may have to switch to like a full-size clutch, because like I don't really care for it to rev super fast. Like, it's cool that it revs super fast, but like it's very difficult to try to like A, slip the clutch, and B, keep the RPMs up enough when you start letting out of the clutch. Like as soon as you start letting out of the clutch, they just fall. So you have to go up to like 3 grand and like slip in. And it's like, it's very tricky. Very tricky. Nothing like driving the Miata, but man, that was difficult. But again, this has a really tall first gear. It's like me using second in the Miata, which makes sense because we also have the 397 gears in the back. I forgot about that. So that makes my first, like, I need to look, but like 65 or 70, which is really tall. So I might for now need to switch it to the 427 just to shorten up first a little bit. But I mean, overall it seemed good for what it was in the situation. It's very hard to try to drive down a very short street and turn around when you can't see anything. But yeah, so on the laundry list, power steering seems to be working pretty well. Brakes, definitely got to fix the brakes. Brakes are non-existent. The rear alignment is non-existent. You could feel the car wandering really bad. But I would say definitely main things are getting the brakes working. Power steering again seems to be working. So, I mean, not too bad. We did it. We did a drive. It drove. It's gonna, dude, that really put things into perspective. I was having trouble with the clutch too when I was trying to turn around. Like I had to like just cram it in reverse. But then when I stopped out there, it was fine again. I don't know if maybe I just wasn't pushing it far enough or something. I don't know. But just the way it felt, like as you took off and you hear the gear whine, dude, it's gonna be so crazy to drive this car on track. The run up just, oh my God. Wild. Thankfully it's not super loud, so we can do this kind of testing, messing around, and not be like waking up people 3 counties over. So after that pretty awful first drive, I knew we had some work to do. This is why I don't normally like to rush first drives and first starts, because if you rush it and you're not really ready, it doesn't really tell you anything. You know, it's just kind of doing it for the sake of doing it. So we knew what we needed to fix. We learned a lot from the drive, so we just needed to get on fixing it. So one of the big things was we needed to finally align this car. It's just been eyeball aligned. We haven't aligned it. So since we're going to be aligning it, I wanted to go ahead and mount tires on our permanent long-term wheels and get those on the car as we aligned it. So I decided to make a little change to the Ackerman setting on the angle kit. We had it almost negative, and we're going for a slightly positive, which is what I'm used to, just to start out. We got a lot to learn with this car. Might as well start on, kind of a solid footing of something I'm more familiar with. While I was working on that, Josue started working on getting our back pressure canister plumbed in. So this is going to read back pressure in the exhaust system, and this is a pretty crucial piece of information for us because this will tell us, if we're starting to really restrict the engine, if the engine's getting really choked out. And my goal with this isn't to make any set power number, but my goal is to basically make the power to where the engine's happy and it's not strung out and choked out. So with that out of the way, we went ahead and started getting our new wheels on to see how they look, and then get our alignment kit on and start aligning this thing out. So again, this thing's been eyeballed from the start. The rear isn't even really eyeballed. I'm pretty sure the last time we touched it was We bolted it all down when it was in the garage before we pushed it over to the shop the first time before we got the fours done. So literally just tightened everything in place where it was. So the front was a little bit off, as it usually is going to be eyeballing it, but I do a lot of messing around with alignments on the front. I normally don't touch the rear on the Miata. I just set camber for whatever I need for tire wear and toe in or no toe. So the rear, since it wasn't eyeballed, was way off. I mean, way off. All right, well, as chaotic and short as that first drive was, we did learn a lot from it and made a lot of changes, really more so fixes. One of the good things is the electric power steering seems to work pretty well. Off the bat, works better than the Volvo setup in the Zafiro. So that's a good sign. When we decided to build this turbo kit and keep this car turbo, that was one of the things, to build it well and efficiently and make it serviceable. We weren't going to be able to fit a regular power steering pump. So we kind of had to commit to the electric pump, and I was nervous about it because I did not want it to drive like that car does at the moment. And so far it feels good, but again, time will tell once we start actually drifting this thing. So learning the clutch has been a challenge, but again, there were some things that were really not helping our cause. The rear alignment was a big one of them. We had 1.5 inches of toe out. So you imagine the wheels trying to go that way as you're trying to go straight. So you're just dragging it. So between that and the brakes dragging a little bit, which unfortunately they still are, it's kind of like if you've ever had a manual car and you left the handbrake up and tried to drive off, you'll know what I'm talking about. It makes it a struggle. So that should help. We moved the seat forward, driver ergonomics. The clutch just, when everything shook out, with everything bled, the clutch was just too far away. I was having to pretty much fully lock my knee to get the clutch disengaged. And that's not good for a lot of reasons, but especially not good when you're trying to modulate it, because you're locking and unlocking your leg at that precise point where it's trying to engage. So move the seat forward, and that's kind of two birds, one stone. I was a little far from the shifter, so now everything's nice and within reach. Ergonomics are big for me, especially in a comp car, so I'm sure we'll tinker with this stuff more. But for now, I think it's better at a minimum. There's just a lot of things that weren't ideal on that first drive. That being said, want to drive it again. A little bit of redemption from the last one, not stall it 20 times. But in the meantime, before Josue gets here, I am going to build my false floor. That's another thing that really needs to get done before we drive it. I basically need to build a floor that mounts to the pedal box here and covers up our lines and all of that stuff and gives my feet a place to rest while I'm driving the car and using the pedals. So we need to whip out the CAD. If we do a good job with the CAD, we might not have to do any welding. If we do a sloppy job, then we'll probably have to do some welding. But it's going to be a lot of cutting, grinding, and bending. So I need to quit jibber jabbering, and we need to get to it. So we whipped out some cardboard for our cardboard aided design. Now, I used to never make templates for stuff. I'd always just go for it on the actual piece. And that was out of pure laziness, and I've definitely learned it's a lot easier to make your mistakes and get things fitting pretty decent with cardboard than to try to do it with steel or aluminum. You just end up with a much better finished product. So we're trimming this thing, figuring out where we want some extra clearance, where our corners are going to go, and then we grab our sheet of aluminum. So I'm going to use relatively thick aluminum on this. I have thick and thin. I don't want to have to build a ton of structure for it. If I use the thicker stuff, it'll have a lot of structure on its own. So I mark out the rough guidelines with the cardboard template, but it doesn't have straight edges. So I don't try to mark a perfectly straight edge. I just mark essentially the corners and then use a square to get all my straight edges. So since this piece is too big to fit in the bandsaw, what I do is I cut the main shape out with a circular saw with a carbide tipped blade. Now this is essentially a wood blade, but aluminum's so soft that it works on it often. And then we move to the bandsaw to cut the more precise shapes, the finer, more intricate details. And that way we just have less cleanup work to do on the belt grinder. The less work we got to do there, the better. So we need to start bending this thing, and I wanted to make this upgrade to my press brake setup. Now, I've wanted to do this for a while, but when we were in the shop temporarily and we didn't have air everywhere, and when we were in the garage, it wasn't really worthwhile. But now that we've got all our air lines plumbed, we're in the shop, we can finally put this air over hydraulic ram on the press brake, and that makes life a lot easier because I can watch both sides of the bend as I'm using this thumb lever to kind of bend everything. So it just makes it a lot easier and a lot quicker. It takes forever when you're just chattering and chattering trying to crank that thing up and down to get it set, and it's something I wanted to do for a while. I was pretty excited to finally get it done. This is a great project to test it out on. So we get that first shape done, which is the toughest, the most precise, because it's got to follow the shape of the pedal box structure. And then we need to make our bend up for our bottom leg where we're going to bolt it in, and then our bend down to basically go down and meet the floor. So we start working on bending that. I start with the bottom short leg first, just because I can kind of tweak that angle as I do the other one. The other one's a lot bigger and more important. So I test fit it back in there, and it's just a little bit wonky. It's not bent perfectly square. So I try to bend it just a little bit more in some spots and less in others. Just try to get that both those bends just a little more flat and square and even across the board. So with that, we had marked our holes for the pedal box and marked our holes for the bottom where we're going to bolt it through the floor, and we get those drilled out. I always countersink the holes just the tiniest bit just to deburr them and make them smooth and clean. And another thing I wanted to do, since this is heavier, thicker gauge aluminum, I wanted to do some speed holes. Plus, I mean, no one can deny that pretty much any boring, normal shape always looks way cooler when you drill some holes into it. So we got that done. We got a few more up in the top. Then we really countersunk our top bolts, since these are going to be kind of under our feet. I wanted to get those nice and recessed and use countersunk hardware. While I was doing all of this, Josue was working on all of our line routing. So we still hadn't secured everything perfectly from when we remade the fuel lines, and there was still a few odds and ends that were unfinished. So we finished all that up, got everything heat sleeved nicely, so that way we don't have to worry about anything with heat. So he was done with that. I was done with the pedal plate itself. It's time to toss it back in. All right, it's in. It fits good. Countersunk bolts sunk nicely. So overall, I'm honestly really happy with how this came out. I do want to add a couple things in the future. Maybe now we'll see how it feels with my feet on it, but a side plate here to cover this up, and then a dead pedal over here. So, you know, you take your foot off the clutch and you have a place to rest it like you would in a stock car. But overall, really, really pumped on that. So we're gonna put grip tape here. But of course, I really wanted to get some grip tape with a cool pattern on it, so it's not going to be here for a couple days. But overall, it came out pretty nice. About as easy as expected. Really wasn't too bad. Let's give it a trial run. It's not in the way of getting in. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, no, I mean, that's pretty much everything I could have hoped. And even without the sides, I went with a thick aluminum, so it's really solid. My only thing I'm a little worried about is how far I cut this back for the linkage here. I could only go forward like a ½ inch anyway. We'll see how it goes. It's one of those things you think about it and you're like, what if my foot gets caught in there? But you might drive it and it never happens. You might drive it and it happens every time. You really got to see how it pans out. But sweet, man. I just wish I could finish it out with the grip tape, but I'm going to drill these bottom holes, get those bolted in. But I think we're ready to go test drive this thing again and see if it works. Hopefully it's a little bit better now. If it's better but not quite there, we'll swap the gearing and then, you know, just to get used to it. But anyway, I'm jibber jabbering. Let me finish this up, and Josue should be here and we'll go try to drive this thing again. Definitely better. Before it was like I had to pull it to get it to move at all.
looks so good.
Oh man, what a feeling. Wow, that was a million times better. That's why I wanted to drive it again before the gear change. Because if we change the gear, the first would be the same as second on my Miata, which trying to do tight U-turns in second, I normally put it in first. I start in that car in second a lot, especially for like comps and stuff. And if I'm in a straight line, but if I'm moving slow, like moving in grid or making tight U-turns, I put it in first because it's hard to do with that tall of a gear. This is 68, so it's 6 miles an hour longer than the Miata's second even. So like it's gonna be challenging no matter what. But with all those fixes, with the clutch better, me not fully extending my leg, having the plate feel super solid, woo, everything felt good. I can't tell you what, that first drive was such a letdown. Not a letdown, but it was chaotic, and it was like, this thing is borderline undrivable. Whereas that time I was already starting to feel comfortable. So yeah, what was I gonna say? Clutch. I'm hoping once we get it tuned, it'll be a little better. For whatever reason, like I was testing it up there without even using the pedal. It just kind of like revs and down revs as you're trying to hold a static amount of throttle. So that wasn't really as much me as it was just the car. The brakes need a little more bleeding, but they seem to work well. This will be my first time having full manual. This will be my first time having full manual brakes. And you know, when I really got after it, they went like down too far, but I think they'll work really well compared to what I'm used to, especially because in drifting, you know, you run out of brake booster pretty quick. So I'm jibber jabbering, but you know what? We're gonna end it here. Car runs, it drives. We plan to go to the dyno in a few days. Like, sorry, I don't even know if you can see me, but that's exciting. What do you think, Josue? Chime in here. The people want to know. Josue is hyped.
I'm hyped.
He said it looks sick rolling. So we'll probably, in the meantime, while we wait for our dyno appointment with Kevin at KSR, we'll probably go ahead and start working on body stuff, because I mean, we're pretty well sorted. We got a couple sensors I want to add that we just got in. I want to make sure every sensor possible is working, so Kevin has all the info he needs. But I mean, after the dyno, it's aligned, like we're ready to drive this dang thing. So I'm pumped, man. I can't. That felt good. That felt good, dude. That was what I needed after that first drive. So anyway, I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for subscribing. I sure hope to see you next time, but for now, that's it. All right, goodbye. Too much of a reach. Goodbye.